The morning sun had barely crested the distant hills when the rancher rode along a narrow, dust-choked trail on the outskirts of the frontier town. His horse moved steadily, muscles rippling under the worn leather saddle, but the man's attention was elsewhere. He was a man of habit, accustomed to the quiet rhythms of the land, the whispering wind, the creak of the wooden fence posts he passed. Yet something about the stillness that morning unsettled him. Birds usually sang from the trees at this hour, and the faint rustle of small animals in the brush offered reassurance of life. Today there was nothing, an eerie, unnatural silence that gnawed at the edges of his instincts. As he rounded a bend, he saw it, a small cabin, weathered and nearly hidden beneath tangled vines in an overgrown yard. Its roof sagged under years of neglect, and the boards were gray and cracked from the sun and wind. Smoke from a fire, or perhaps the lack of it, didn't rise from the chimney. Something about the scene made the rancher's heart tighten. He slowed his horse, peering through the dust and brush, his experienced eyes searching for signs of movement. Then he saw her. A small figure crouched near the cabin's doorway, hunched over something on the ground. The sight stopped him cold. Even from a distance, he could tell this was no ordinary child at play. Her movements were slow, almost careful, and her posture was rigid with fear or grief. As he drew closer, the sight became unmistakable. The girl was clutching a motionless body, her arms wrapped tightly around her mother, her small face buried in her mother's chest as if sheer will could keep death from taking hold. The rancher dismounted quietly, not wanting to startle her. His boots crunched softly against the dry earth as he approached, hands open and calm. "Hey there, little one," he said gently, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone used to coaxing nervous animals, though he had never needed this skill on a human before. The girl froze, her eyes wide and unblinking, dark pools of fear and sorrow. She did not speak. She did not move. The rancher could see the dirt in her hair, the torn remnants of what had once been a neat dress, and the faint bruises marking her small body. She was a child left alone, defenseless, and in shock. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Out here, far from the town, survival was not guaranteed for anyone, let alone a girl so small, holding on to the last tether of her family. He took a careful step closer. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I'm just here to help." His eyes swept over her mother's body. The woman's features were serene in the stillness of death, but the telltale stiffness of her limbs told him she had been gone for hours, maybe longer. The rancher felt a pang of sorrow for the girl, for the life that had been abruptly shattered. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her mother's shoulders. Her eyes flicked toward the rancher, wary and searching for danger in his face. The rancher crouched down, lowering himself to her level without crossing into her space, respecting the invisible barrier of grief she had erected. "It's okay," he murmured. "I can help. We'll take care of this together." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind through the trees and the soft rasp of the girl's breathing. The rancher understood that trust could not be forced. It had to be earned. And yet, even in her fear and sorrow, he saw the glimmer of life in her eyes, the stubborn spark of a child refusing to give up entirely. That spark was enough. He made a silent vow. Whoever had left this child alone with her mother had underestimated her, and he would not. He would ensure she survived, no matter the cost. Even if it meant opening a place in his own heart. The rancher stayed where he was, kneeling a short distance from the girl and her mother. He didn't want to startle her by moving too quickly, but he also knew that time was against them. The girl's small frame shivered slightly, not from the cold but from a mix of fear, shock, and exhaustion. Her eyes, wide and wary, flicked nervously between him and her mother's still form, never settling on him long enough to trust him. He reached slowly into his saddlebag, producing a tin of biscuits and a canteen of water. The smell of baked bread and the glint of clean water were simple things, but in situations like this, small comforts mattered. He spoke gently, almost as if talking to an animal. "I've got some food here. You look like you haven't eaten in a while." The girl's eyes darted to the tin and back to him, then to her mother. She shook her head, a subtle yet firm denial. The rancher understood this wasn't defiance, it was fear. Fear that if she let go, even for a moment, she might lose her mother forever. He lowered the tin to the ground, a safe distance from her, and stepped back slightly. "I'm not going to touch you or her," he said softly. "I just want to help. I can bury her properly, like she deserves, and make sure you're safe. Nothing else." Her small hands trembled as she gripped her mother's shoulders tighter. Her lips moved, forming words too quiet for him to hear, a desperate whisper meant only for the woman she had lost. The rancher remained still, letting her speak, giving her time to process that he wasn't a threat. He knew that trust, once broken by loss or abandonment, was not easy to rebuild. Minutes passed in tense silence. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and the distant tang of the river. The rancher kept his eyes soft and steady on her, not pressuring, simply showing presence. Slowly, hesitantly, she shifted her weight, just slightly, enough for him to see that she was listening, aware of his calm demeanor. He spoke again, recounting small details of life on the ranch, how he tended the animals, the way the seasons changed the land, even the funny antics of a stubborn mule named Jed. The stories were mundane, but they served a purpose: humanity, warmth, and the suggestion that the world still had pockets of safety and care, even in the face of tragedy. The girl's gaze lingered on him longer this time, as if evaluating whether he was telling the truth. Her hands loosened a fraction, though not enough for him to step closer. He recognized the small victory. She had registered that he was patient and not a threat. Patience, he thought, was often more powerful than force. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity in both silence and tension, she allowed him to approach a few inches closer, just enough for him to sit on the ground beside her without crossing her invisible boundary. She didn't speak, but she didn't push him away either. It was the smallest concession, yet monumental in its significance. In that delicate moment, the rancher understood that the first step had been taken. The child had recognized the possibility of safety, even if only in the tiniest flickering measure. He would need more than kindness to fully earn her trust, but for now, it was enough. They were no longer two strangers in a world of grief. They were tentative allies against the harsh reality surrounding them. And as he watched her carefully, silently guarding her mother, he made another quiet vow. He would not fail her. He would not let her face the wilderness alone, not when she had already suffered so much. Hard for a child who had known only loss. And so, in the quiet of the morning, the rancher and the orphan girl began the first, delicate steps of a connection that would change both their lives forever. The rancher studied the girl and her mother carefully, realizing for the first time the full weight of the situation. Her mother lay motionless, her skin pale under the harsh morning light, the stillness of death stark and unyielding. The rancher's practiced hands used to tending livestock, patching wounds, and navigating the hardships of frontier life recognized immediately that there was no life to save here. The woman had been gone for hours, maybe longer, and the small child had been left alone in the most merciless of circumstances. He knelt slowly, keeping his tone soft and calm. "She's gone," he said gently, his voice steady even as sorrow tightened in his chest. "I'm sorry. I know you wanted to stay with her. I know it hurts." The girl's small body stiffened, her fingers clutching her mother's clothes like a lifeline. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she did not let them fall. She refused to look at him, staring instead at the wooden floorboards and the cold air around her mother. The rancher understood. Grief often created walls higher than any fence or locked door. He took a cautious breath and surveyed the cabin. Broken furniture, scattered belongings, and the signs of a struggle told him that this child had been fending for herself as best as she could. Food was scarce. Water had likely been limited. Dust covered the floor, and faint footprints suggested she hadn't left the cabin in days. The rancher's heart tightened. She had survived alone, scavenging whatever she could find, protecting the body of her mother against the inevitability of death, all while facing hunger, exhaustion, and the danger of the wilderness outside. "I know you've been looking after her," he said softly, keeping his distance, but lowering himself to her level. "You've been very brave. Braver than most grown men I know. But now we need to make sure you're safe too." The girl's lips trembled. Her gaze flicked to him for the briefest moment, a spark of recognition passing through her fear, maybe an acknowledgement that she could not face this alone forever. Yet her hand still remained on her mother's shoulders, unwilling to release the only connection she had left. The rancher did not force her. He understood that trauma had a rhythm, and trust must arrive at its own pace. He quietly retrieved a blanket from his saddlebag and spread it over the girl's mother, shielding her from the cold morning air. "She deserves respect," he said, "and so do you. But staying here alone won't help either of you." The girl's lips quivered, but she did not cry openly. She began rocking slightly, a tiny unconscious motion to comfort herself as much as her mother. The rancher's mind raced, calculating the harsh realities, the cold morning air, the absence of food, and the danger of wild animals or opportunists in these isolated lands. He realized that if he didn't act soon, she might not survive another night alone. Slowly, he offered her food again, a small piece of bread this time, closer but still not threatening. "You have to eat something," he said gently. "Even the strongest fighters can't keep going without a bit of bread and water. You need to take care of yourself, too." The girl hesitated, eyes darting between the food, the rancher, and her mother. Eventually, hunger won over fear. She took the bread with trembling fingers, her small body shaking from exhaustion. It was a minor victory, but it was progress. The rancher nodded quietly, acknowledging her courage and resilience. In that quiet cabin, the harsh reality became painfully clear. The girl had survived unimaginable circumstances, but she could not continue alone. Her mother's death had left her defenseless in a world that showed no mercy, and it would take every ounce of the rancher's experience, patience, and heart to keep her alive. After the small, tense victory of the girl accepting a piece of bread, the rancher felt a cautious sense of hope. He understood that the road ahead would be long. Trust, once broken or unformed, was fragile. But for the first time, he sensed a tiny crack in the wall of fear surrounding the girl, a door that might open if he approached carefully. He spoke softly, almost as if the words themselves could build a bridge between them. "You know," he began, keeping his tone gentle, "I lost someone too, long ago. My ma. She died when I was about your age. I remember how alone I felt, but someone helped me then. And they kept me safe." The girl's eyes flicked toward him, the briefest sign of interest, though she quickly looked away, back to her mother. The rancher wasn't deterred. Even this tiny acknowledgement was progress. He continued, sharing stories of life on the ranch, not grand or exciting tales, but small glimpses into a life filled with routine, hard work, and unexpected humor. He told her about a mule that refused to follow orders, a stubborn old dog who liked to hide the mail, and the way the sunrise painted the hills golden every morning. The girl listened, her body still tense, but she didn't push him away. She was curious, a natural instinct that could overcome fear when nurtured. The rancher smiled inwardly. Humor and warmth could be as persuasive as any show of strength in winning a frightened child's trust. After a few more moments, he carefully suggested they prepare her mother for a proper burial. He approached the task delicately, explaining each step as he worked. "We'll give her a good resting place," he said, "somewhere she can lie peacefully." and we'll make sure you stay safe." The girl hesitated, then slowly helped him, mimicking his movements in small, cautious ways. She was silent, but her eyes tracked his every motion. When he handed her a small spade to help dig the grave, her hand shook, but she accepted it. It was the first tangible act of cooperation between them, a silent acknowledgement that he was not there to harm her, and that perhaps he could be trusted. As the grave took shape, he talked to her more about the ranch, this time weaving in lessons about survival. "Sometimes," he said gently, "we have to make choices to keep going. Even when it's hard. Even when we're scared. That doesn't make us weak, it makes us strong." The girl glanced at him briefly. His calm voice, the steadiness of his hands, the way he treated her mother with care, these things mattered. Slowly, she began to shift her posture, easing the rigid tension in her body. Trust, fragile and delicate, was beginning to root itself. By the time they finished the burial, a strange new bond had formed. The girl wasn't smiling, far from it, but there was a subtle light in her eyes, a recognition that she was no longer entirely alone. The rancher had managed to reach her just enough that she allowed herself a sliver of hope. He knelt beside her as they stood over the grave, his hand resting gently near hers, careful not to intrude. "You're safe now," he said softly. "I'll make sure of it. You don't have to do this alone anymore." For a moment, the girl looked up at him, her gaze steady, her fears still present but tempered by something new, a fragile trust. She did not speak, but her silence spoke volumes. She was beginning to understand that he was not just a stranger, but a protector. And in that quiet, sunlit clearing, amidst grief and loss, the first connection between the rancher and the orphan girl had been forged, a connection that would carry them both through the dangers and challenges yet to come. The sun had climbed higher, casting warm light over the freshly dug grave. The rancher had worked carefully alongside the girl, letting her participate in small ways, guiding her hands as she lowered her mother into the earth. She had been silent for most of the morning, but her actions spoke volumes, a mix of reverence, grief, and tentative trust. Each shovelful of dirt placed over her mother's resting place felt like both an ending and a fragile new beginning. When the grave was finally covered, the rancher stepped back, wiping his hands on his coat. He looked at the girl, who now sat on the edge of the shallow mound, hugging her knees to her chest. "You did good today," he said softly. "It was hard." "I know it was, but she's resting now. And you're still here. That's what matters." The girl's eyes met his briefly. For the first time, she did not look away. There was no smile, not yet, but a faint acknowledgement in her gaze, a subtle signal that she was beginning to believe him, beginning to accept that she might not have to face the world alone. After a long pause, the rancher produced a small bundle of supplies from his saddlebag, a tin cup, a bit of bread, and a worn blanket. "We need to get you some food and water," he said, kneeling near her. "Then I'll show you a few things that might help you stay safe." The girl hesitated but took the food, her small hands trembling. She ate slowly, as if testing whether she could trust that this simple nourishment was safe. The rancher didn't rush her, letting her set the pace, knowing that patience was essential. Once she had eaten, he began teaching her small but vital survival skills. First, he showed her how to start a small fire using dry kindling and flint, demonstrating slowly while explaining each step. She watched intently, her hands hovering over the materials, learning to mimic his movements. When the sparks finally caught, her eyes widened in wonder, and a tiny spark of pride flickered in her expression. Next, he taught her to find clean water and identify safe places to rest or shelter. He demonstrated how to move quietly and cautiously, how to notice signs of wildlife, and even how to forage for simple foods like berries or roots. With each lesson, the girl's confidence grew, not in leaps but in small, careful steps. She began to follow instructions more readily, responding to his guidance without fear. As the hours passed, a bond formed that went beyond necessity. The rancher shared small personal stories, not tragic ones, but moments of his own childhood, tales of growing up on the frontier, of animals he had known, and challenges he had faced. Humor and lightness threaded through the stories, offering the girl glimpses of a life that was not only survival but also possibility. By evening, they had built a small fire to warm themselves, the girl sitting close enough that she could feel the comfort of another human presence. She began to ask quiet questions, tentative but sincere. Do you always live out here?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. The rancher nodded, smiling. "Most of the time. But it's not as lonely as it seems. Not when you've got company." That night, as they prepared a temporary shelter near the cabin, the girl rested her head against the blanket he had brought. She did not sleep fully, her mind still tangled with grief, but she did not pull away from him. For the first time since her mother had died, she allowed herself to exist in a space where she was cared for, not merely surviving. In the quiet of the night, under a sky scattered with stars, the rancher knew something important had shifted. The child had begun to trust him, not completely, but enough to take her first steps toward healing. And in guiding her, teaching her, and protecting her, he too found a subtle change within himself, a softening, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This was more than survival. This was the start of a bond that could carry them both through the harsh frontier, through loss, and toward a future neither of them could yet imagine. The days following the burial passed quietly at first. The girl began to settle into the routine of survival under the rancher's guidance. She learned to care for herself a little more each day, fetching water, building fires, and even helping with small chores around the cabin. Yet, just as she was beginning to feel a fragile sense of safety, the world beyond their small sanctuary began to intrude. Word of the child alone with her mother had spread through the nearby town. Rumors of a girl with property, perhaps even inheritance, drew attention from those who had no intention of helping. Unscrupulous men came seeking opportunity, their intentions clear in the sly looks and whispered threats. The rancher noticed the first signs one afternoon, tracks in the dirt surrounding the cabin that did not match his own, signs of lingering footsteps, broken branches where someone had brushed against them. "Someone's been here," he told the girl quietly, crouching beside her. She stiffened, eyes wide with fear. "Don't worry," he added firmly. "I've got you. You're not alone." He could see the panic building in her, the same fear he had observed when he first found her. But he also noticed something else, the resilience that had carried her through the days alone with her mother. He needed to act fast to protect her, and to reinforce that she was no longer alone in facing danger. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the wind carried a chill from the mountains, the intruders arrived. Two men, rough and calculating, approached the cabin under the guise of curiosity. They called out, trying to coax the girl into opening the door, their voices friendly but laced with menace. The rancher stepped forward, his presence sudden and imposing. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said in a calm, even tone that held no room for argument. His hand rested on the hilt of the rifle slung across his shoulder, not to threaten the child, but to make clear that he was serious. The men laughed, underestimating the man before them. "Little girl can't go on her own," one sneered. "You're wasting your time." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "She's not going anywhere because I said so. You'll leave now, or I'll make sure you regret it." His voice carried the weight of authority, the quiet confidence of someone who had survived the frontier long enough to know how to protect what mattered. The girl, watching from behind him, felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. For the first time, someone else was standing between her and the dangers of the world. She realized that this man, the rancher, was not just a teacher or protector. He was a force she could rely on. The intruders hesitated, recognizing the determination in his eyes. After a tense silence, They muttered threats and retreated into the shadows, leaving only the sound of their boots fading through the brush. The girl's shoulders sagged with relief, and she clung briefly to the rancher, seeking comfort in his presence. "That's why you have to trust me," he said quietly, brushing her hair back gently. "There are people out there who will take advantage if they can, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The encounter reinforced the fragile bond between them. The girl had seen firsthand that he would fight for her, that he would keep her safe when the world turned cruel. And the rancher, in protecting her, felt a growing sense of responsibility and purpose. He had found the child when she was most vulnerable, and now, more than ever, he understood that his role was not just to survive alongside her, but to ensure she lived fully, safely, and with hope. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, the girl slept more soundly than she had in days, knowing that at least for now she was shielded from the dangers lurking outside. And the rancher, keeping watch, silently vowed that no threat would take her from him while he still drew breath. The days after the intruder's visit were tense but quiet. The girl moved more freely around the cabin, still cautious, still haunted by her mother's absence, but beginning to trust the rancher more openly. He watched her closely, noting each small step toward self-reliance. Yet, beneath the surface of this fragile calm, a pressing realization had taken root in his mind. She could not remain here. The town was not safe for a child alone. Even with him nearby, rumors had already started to spread, and more unscrupulous people could arrive at any moment. Her home, the only one she had ever known, was now a graveyard of memories and danger. The rancher understood that the girl's attachment to this place, to the memory of her mother, was natural. But attachment could not outweigh survival. He sat beside her that morning as she carefully tended the small fire, the smoke curling lazily into the crisp air. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "This place, it's not safe for you. People are curious, sometimes greedy, and you're too young to face them on your own. I want to take you somewhere you'll be safe." The girl froze, her small hands gripping the edge of the cabin steps. I can't leave her," she whispered, voice trembling. Her mother's grave was close by, and the weight of loyalty and grief made the idea of leaving unbearable. "I know," he said gently. "I know you don't want to leave her. But she wouldn't want you to stay in danger, would she? She would want you to live, to be safe. You're strong, and you've done more than anyone expected, but even the strongest need someone to watch over them sometimes." Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. I can't go with you." The rancher took a deep breath. He knew this decision could not be forced. It had to be guided with patience and understanding. "I'm not asking you to forget her," he said. "I'm asking you to trust me. I can give you a safe place, a warm home, and someone to look after you. You won't be alone anymore. And I promise we'll visit her whenever you want. You can honor her memory without putting yourself at risk." The girl hesitated, wrestling with grief, fear, and the faint spark of hope the rancher had kindled. Her small frame trembled, but she began to see the logic in his words. Survival meant stepping forward, even when the past weighed heavily. Finally, after what felt like hours in that silent, sunlit clearing, she nodded slightly. "Okay," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I'll go." The rancher smiled gently, relief washing over him. "That's all I ask. You'll be safe with me, I promise." He offered his hand, and for the first time, she took it without hesitation. Her fingers, small and fragile, closed around his with tentative trust, a symbol of the fragile bond that had been forming over days of shared grief and survival. They began preparations for the journey to his ranch. He packed supplies carefully, taking extra blankets, dried food, and water. He reassured her along the way, explaining each step, and made sure she felt part of the decision, not just a passive passenger. As they set out together, leaving the cabin and her mother's grave behind, The girl felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. The open road stretched before them, uncertain and daunting, but she sensed that this path, however unfamiliar, was safer than remaining behind. And as the rancher led the way, she clung to a fragile hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place in this wide, wild world after all. In that moment, the rancher understood something vital. Trust had been given, not forced. And with it came responsibility, an unbreakable promise to keep her safe, to guide her, and to become the guardian she so desperately needed. The morning air was crisp as the rancher and the girl mounted their horses, leaving behind the cabin that had been her only home. The girl's small hands gripped the reins tightly, her eyes wide as the landscape unfolded before her. Rolling hills, dense forests, and the winding river they had crossed many times. The world felt vast and uncertain, but for the first time she wasn't facing it alone. The rancher rode beside her, keeping his pace slow to match her tentative confidence. "The road ahead is long," he said gently, "but we'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to rush." His words were calm, steady, like the rhythm of the horse's hooves on the dirt trail. She nodded silently, taking comfort in his presence. As they traveled, he began teaching her the practical skills she would need to survive, not just for the journey, but for life on the ranch. He showed her how to read the tracks of animals, how to tell if water ahead was safe to drink, and how to move quietly through the woods without startling wildlife. Each lesson was small but vital, and she absorbed them eagerly, her fear gradually giving way to fascination and pride. They encountered their first real challenge the second day. A fallen tree blocked the path along the ridge. The girl froze, unsure how to proceed. The rancher dismounted and motioned for her to stay calm. "We'll get through this together," he said, tying his horse to a nearby tree. He demonstrated how to climb over safely, steadying her with a firm hand. Her initial fear melted into determination as she followed his guidance, conquering the obstacle with a newfound sense of confidence. By nightfall, they set up camp near a small creek. The rancher taught her how to start a fire, boil water, and prepare a simple meal from dried meat and bread. She watched intently, and when she tried herself, he encouraged her with gentle corrections. Laughter finally bubbled from her lips when she accidentally flung a piece of bread into the fire, and he teased her about cooking a surprise dinner. It was the first time he heard a genuine laugh from her since finding her by her mother's side. During the evenings, they talked about life not in the abstract, but in ways that were tangible and relatable. He shared stories of the ranch, of animals he had raised, and of friends who had come and gone. She began to open up too, shyly at first, recounting small memories of her mother and home. He listened without judgment, allowing her grief to exist while showing that the world was not entirely cruel. The journey was not without hardship. They faced sudden rainstorms that drenched them to the bone, steep climbs that tested their endurance, and nights when the howls of wolves reminded them of the dangers that lurked. Yet, with each challenge, their bond deepened. She learned to trust not only his skills but his judgment, his instincts, and his steadfast presence. By the time they neared the ranch, the girl's posture had changed. She rode taller, her eyes scanning the horizon with quiet confidence. She had survived the wilderness, learned to rely on herself, and more importantly, begun to rely on someone else. The rancher, observing her transformation, felt a mixture of pride and tenderness. The journey had been as much about teaching her survival as it had been about showing her that life could continue beyond loss. As the sun dipped below the distant hills, casting golden light over the ranch's sprawling fields, the girl looked toward her new home. Fear had not vanished entirely, but it was tempered by hope. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of possibility. And as they rode through the gate, the rancher knew that this journey, both literal and emotional, had laid the foundation for a life that neither of them could have imagined alone. The ranch stretched before them like a living, breathing world of endless possibilities. Rolling fields of golden grass, grazing cattle, and sturdy wooden fences lined the horizon. The girl's eyes widened as she took it all in, her small hands gripping the saddle tightly. For weeks, she had known only the cramped cabin and the shadow of grief. Now, everything was open, vibrant, and alive. The rancher led her through the main house first, showing her the kitchen, the small bedrooms, and the cozy sitting room where a fire always crackled in the hearth. He handed her a clean set of clothes, explaining gently, "You'll need to be comfortable if you're going to live here. And besides, you deserve it." The girl hesitated at first, unused to kindness offered without expectation. Slowly, she accepted the clothes, the warmth of the gesture settling into her like a soft balm. Next, he introduced her to the ranch animals. Horses nickered softly as they approached, a few curious calves sniffed at her boots, and a loyal old dog wagged its tail, circling her feet. She reached out cautiously to pet the animals, laughter escaping in tiny bursts as she realized that they posed no threat. The rancher watched her with quiet satisfaction. Each moment of connection with the animals was another thread in the web of trust and comfort he was weaving for her. As the days passed, she began to take part in daily chores, learning not only the practical skills of ranch life, but also the rhythm and responsibility of caring for others. She fed chickens, gathered eggs, helped mend fences, and even learned the basics of saddling and riding horses under his patient instruction. Every task brought small victories, each one building her confidence and sense of belonging. But the rancher understood that healing was more than survival and routine. It was emotional, too. He encouraged her to speak of her mother when she was ready, to tell stories or ask questions, or even simply sit in silence by the creek and remember. Slowly, she began to open her heart, sharing memories of her mother's gentle hands, her laugh, and the small routines they had once shared. The rancher listened with care, never interrupting, offering a steady presence instead of empty platitudes. Evenings became their time to connect more personally. They would sit by the fire, sharing stories of the day, teaching her small skills, or simply enjoying the quiet. Sometimes he told tales of the frontier, of adventures and misadventures alike, and she would laugh, her voice light and free. The rancher marveled at the resilience of this child who had faced unimaginable loss yet still found a way to laugh and learn again. Despite the comfort of the ranch, the girl still had moments of fear or sorrow. A shadow, a sudden sound, or a memory could trigger tears or hesitation. But each time, the rancher was there, a steady anchor in her uncertain world. "It's okay to feel scared," he told her gently one evening, "but you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Weeks turned into months, and the girl gradually began to feel a sense of home. She explored every corner of the ranch with growing curiosity and confidence, discovering hidden paths, secret hollows, and her favorite spot by a quiet pond where she could watch the sky and reflect. The rancher observed quietly from a distance at first, allowing her independence, and then gradually stepped closer, ready to guide when needed. By the time the first frost of winter touched the fields, the girl had not only adapted but flourished. She had found joy in the small rhythms of ranch life, safety in the presence of the rancher, and hope for a future she had once thought impossible. The once lonely child guarding her mother's body was now a young girl with a place to belong, a protector she could trust, and the beginnings of a new life built on resilience, love, and care. The first light of dawn painted the ranch in soft gold, highlighting the frost-kissed fields and the quiet stirrings of life across the property. The girl stood at the edge of the barnyard, watching the animals move about, her breath forming little clouds in the crisp morning air. There was a serenity in her posture, a calmness that had been absent in her eyes for months. She was no longer the fragile, frightened child clutching her mother's body. She was a young girl who had survived, learned, and begun to thrive. The rancher approached quietly, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Morning," he said gently. The girl turned to him, a small smile tugging at her lips, genuine, unforced, and filled with warmth. The smile spoke volumes: hope, trust, and the courage to live again. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady. The rancher felt a swell of pride, a quiet affirmation that their journey together had borne fruit. Every step, from finding her alone and frightened, to guiding her through grief and survival, to helping her build confidence, had led to this moment. They walked together across the yard, performing the morning chores side by side. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, and tended to the horses, moving with a sense of purpose that came from understanding her role and responsibility. The rancher offered guidance where needed, but largely let her act independently, trusting her growing skills and judgment. Each small action reinforced the bond between them, showing her that trust and care could coexist with freedom and responsibility. After breakfast, they sat on the porch, the wind carrying the scent of the fields and the distant river. The girl talked freely now, telling stories of her mother, recounting memories she had once kept locked inside. The rancher listened, his presence steady, offering comfort and validation. "She would be proud of you," he said softly, "proud of how strong you've become, and how brave you are to keep going." For the first time, the girl allowed herself to feel the depth of love and care that surrounded her. It wasn't a replacement for what she had lost, but it was something new, a life where she could be protected, nurtured, and encouraged. The rancher had become more than a guardian. He was family, a steadfast anchor in a world that had once been chaotic and cruel. As the sun climbed higher, they ventured across the ranch together, checking fences, watching the animals, and sharing small moments of laughter and connection. She ran ahead briefly, calling out to him in excitement as she discovered a hidden grove of wildflowers. The rancher chuckled, shaking his head in quiet amazement at her curiosity and resilience. That evening, as they sat by the fire in the main house, the girl leaned against the rancher, feeling safe and at home. The hardships of the past, her mother's death, the lonely nights, the dangers she had faced were still part of her story, but they no longer defined her. She had grown, adapted, and found a place where she belonged. The rancher gazed at her, a mix of admiration and tenderness in his eyes. "We've come a long way," he said quietly. The girl nodded, understanding without words the depth of his meaning. They had both been changed by their journey, she by finding safety and hope, he by discovering a sense of purpose and connection he had long thought impossible. Under the wide, starry sky that night, the girl slept peacefully, the rancher keeping watch nearby. For the first time since he had found her alone and grieving, there was a sense of completeness, a new beginning for both of them. Life on the ranch was no longer merely about survival. It was about belonging, growth, and the quiet joy of having found each other amidst loss. In that shared peace, the rancher and the girl looked toward the future with a quiet certainty. Together they could face whatever came next. The past was honored, the present was lived fully, and the future was bright with possibility. A new chapter had begun, one of trust, care, and the unwavering knowledge that neither of them would ever have to face the world alone again.